they say it was Russia. Why won't you agree with them and say it was?
Well, I'll tell you, let me just start off by saying I heard it was 17 agencies. I said, boy, that's a lot. Do we even have that many?
I have to ask about this. Since you started the whole wrestling video thing.
You were invaded yet again, this time by Nazi Germany from the West and the Soviet Union from the East. That's trouble. The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive.
Donald Trump wraps up his second big appearance on the world stage today, and amid the expected Trump gaffes and attacks on the press, the main event was Trump's first official meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin after this unanswered question.
Are you risking election hacking?
Thank you very much.
The two leaders, along with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, met for more than 2 hours, during which time Trump allegedly did bring up Russia's election interference, which Putin again denied. But that highly anticipated meeting might have overshadowed remarks Trump made Thursday in Warsaw. That speech, written by travel ban author Stephen Miller, reminded me of Trump's propensity for dog whistling to the white nationalist alt-right, a habit he carried with him down the escalator in 2015 and all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
We have enough respect for our citizens to protect our borders. Do we have the desire and the courage to preserve our civilization in the face of those who would subvert and destroy it? I declare today for the world to hear that the West will never, ever be broken. Our values will prevail, our people will thrive, and our civilization will triumph.
Joining me now, Executive Director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project, Malcolm Nance, Yahoo News and finance anchor, Bianna Golodryga, Democratic strategist Karine Jean-Pierre, former CIA Special Agent Jack Rice, and Republican media strategist Rick Wilson. Thank you all very much for being here. We've heard lots of clips of the president's speech in Warsaw. To my ear, the one thing that leapt out, which we didn't play it in this clip, but in this whole run of things, talking about Western civilization, he threw in there, "We write symphonies." And that's that triggered the alarm bells for me, that this was not just some speech about democratic values or even Western civilization. This was about something else. And it reminded me of this, that Congressman Steve King said on our air last July.
I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you're talking about. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?
And white people?
Than Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, and every place where the footprint of Christianity settled the world.
Bianna, Malcolm, I'm going to start with you and go around the table. Am I wrong in making this parallel between Steve King, President Trump, and white nationalism?
Well, there's an uncomfortable theme that you're seeing. Specifically, what strikes me is that this president, unlike his predecessors, doesn't go into these meetings and doesn't go into these speeches focusing on democracy and democratic values. And that's the easiest way for him to differentiate us from the Russians, from Vladimir Putin, what have you. So this focus on civilizations, or us versus them, terrorists versus the civilized world, that writes symphonies, what have you, plays right into Vladimir Putin's playbook. And you look at just U.S. polls here. How many Americans view Russia more favorably? You see their commonality when it comes to the NRA, when it comes to evangelicals. I mean, it's something that we're seeing transpire just recently over time, and there is an alarming theme in all of that.
And this is out of the Russian playbook. They've done this in countries in Europe and during their election cycles, trying to sow division.
Of course, and in Eastern Europe, they do it almost the way Adolf Hitler did it, by going after ethnic Russian groups that are pocketed throughout the bordering states of modern-day Russia, and then empowering those. The fighting in Donbass and the Ukraine is just an example of that. Russia gave all of those rebels who are in Ukraine passports and said that they're Russian. But I have one other thing I'd like to add about that speech. That speech was the ultimate fulfillment of Osama bin Laden's ideology of the belief that there would be a clash of civilizations between what he views as his crazy version of Islam and the West. And, you know, bin Laden believed in Samuel Huntington's clash of civilizations, and he thought that by collapsing the Soviet Union with the Mujahideen in the 1980s, that Islam, his version of Islam, not the present one that's been around since 622, his version of Islam would eventually go into a war with the West. And Trump seemed to embody and enshrine that belief that the West should steel itself for a clash of civilizations with other cultures, other beliefs, which pretty much spelled out, you know, the Muslim world.
Right, and you know, Jack, that's one of the things that troubled me the most in that speech by the president, is that he's setting up this clash of civilizations. He's done this thing that President George W. Bush avoided after 9/11, that President Obama studiously avoided during his 8-year presidency, to not give any comfort to those folks in Al-Qaeda and ISIS, anyone in the Muslim world who wants to get converts because the United States and the West is trying to destroy them.
You're right. He's still running for office, and the problem is he's never actually taken the chair and is actually leading the free world, if we want to use that term still. What he has the capability of doing as the President of the United States is to stand up, open up his arms and say, understand, we are all connected. In a globalized world, we can all move forward. We can all drive forward together. This isn't a left versus right or a West versus East or a West versus Middle East issue. We need to find a way to move forward, and there are connections between us where we can all benefit. Instead, he tries to find a way to create a leverage between everybody, so he seems to think he wins. The problem is the United States will continue to lose, and will lose big if he continues down this path. We've seen this failure in the past. Sadly, he seems to want to perpetuate it.
You know, Rick, the president will hear maybe this discussion. Who knows? He might be listening. But he hears the people criticizing his speech in Russia, and he sent out a couple of tweets that I found interesting. One, he sent out on Friday saying, "My experience yesterday in Poland was a great one. Thank you to everyone, including the haters, for the great reviews of the speech." And then, inexplicably, he sends out another tweet on Friday saying, "Everyone here is talking about why John Podesta refused to give the DNC server to the FBI and the CIA. Disgraceful." Let's just leave aside the Podesta tweet, because that is just so out there otherworldly. But let's just deal with the first one about the haters of his speech in Warsaw. Rick.
Look, I think the speech was yes, there was a lot of dog whistling in the speech, but the location is as important as the content. He went to Poland, one of the few places in Europe where he would receive a welcome that wasn't going to be very overtly hostile to him, and he gave a speech there that was red meat for the sort of nationalist and ethno-nationalist authoritarianism that Trump and Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller all are very drawn to. And the underpinning signal there, they don't really believe in Western civilization in the classical sense. They believe in the use of the trope of Western civilization to execute a more authoritarian form of governance. And that is why you end up with a lot of these secret code words and dog whistles that this guy is dependent on, because they don't, like I said, the classical values of Western civilization aren't what they really care about. The symphonies and the literature and the architecture aren't what they really care about. They care about using that as a vector to achieve a more authoritarian and ethno-nationalist form of governance, which is, anathema to constitutional Republican government.
One of the things that, so the president gives this speech in Warsaw. He visits Poland. But it's more like he didn't do something that other presidents have done, and he did not visit the Holocaust Memorial. And here's a quote from Politico in an article about another way Trump dog whistled to nationalists during his visit there in Poland. And it was, The president's decision to skip that symbolic visit was seen as handing a victory to Poland's right-wing nationalist ruling party. The Law and Justice Party has been highlighting the role of the Poles who fought against Nazi Germany while downplaying the persecution of 3 million Polish Jews who perished in the Holocaust. I mean, this is, again, this plays into, I think this is something Bianna talked about, Malcolm talked about, where the president isn't really talking about Western civilization. He's talking about a very specific and narrow slice of a particular civilization. Karine, give me your views on the president's speech and what we've been talking about so far.
I mean, look, Jonathan, this is exactly what we saw for 18 months. The dog whistling, the nationalism. You have Steve Bannon by his side. You have Steve Miller by his side. They all have the same views. Let's not forget the inauguration speech and how awful that was. And so he's taken his campaign mode into presidential mode, right? He did it in inauguration and now into the world, into the global mode. And we have to remember this is a president who believes in isolationism. And so it's not at all surprising. If anything, it's embarrassing because it takes us, the U.S., away from that global leader's role that we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be the leader of the free world, and now you have these different alliances from the world leaders that are happening outside of Donald Trump because they don't trust him. They feel incredibly uncomfortable with him, and so now when they're not talking to him, they're talking about what are we going to do about North Korea. They're talking about what are we going to do about U.S. trade deals. They're talking about, hey, what are we going to do about the Paris Accord now that the U.S. has dropped out? So it just makes us look awful. Yeah, and it's incredibly dangerous.
And Karine, as you were giving your answer, we're showing B-roll of the family photo that they did at the G20. And what's notable about that video that we saw at the beginning, where President Trump is standing. Look right there to the left of your screen. President Trump, the president of the United States at a G20 summit, is shunted off to the side of that group, whereas in years past, the president of the United States has always been front and center, maybe one or two spaces away from maybe the host of the summit. But in talking about the isolation of the United States, Jack, let me come to you with this. Is to what Karine was talking about, how the world is going around the United States. This cannot be good for the long-term strategic national security interests of our country, can it?
Of course it can't be. We look at what the United States did after World War II. We created the Marshall Plan for a reason. We wanted stability. We wanted a bulwark against the Soviet Union, but we also wanted a trading partner. We wanted to strengthen the world because we benefited from that. The United States created an organizational structure, and in fact, the United States became the most powerful country on the planet because of that. The problem that we see right now is that this president has been undercutting those underpinnings. He's been undercutting those organizational structures, and what it's going to do is exclude the United States. It's going to drive the United States into that corner where Donald Trump is. That's the last place we want to be. If you know what, if there's going to be an organization that's out there and we don't get a seat at the table, a whole lot of things are going to be done, but the United States isn't even going to be in the room.
Malcolm, how dangerous is that? And also, is this something that the United States can pull back from, either after the midterm elections, let's say one of the houses flips, or in the next election if there's another president? Keep in mind, we've got 3.5 more years to go. If the United States continues down this more isolated route and is isolated by the rest of the world, can that damage be repaired with another administration or 4 to 8 years from now?
I'm sure it can be repaired. This is the United States, all right? We make mistakes, we go backwards, and then we move forwards. But, we're moving ourselves to a point that's almost pre-World War II, where the American values of the spreading of democracy, which millions, 50 million people lost their lives in World War II, and then that became the principal guiding doctrine of the United States, is now inoperative by the President of the United States and his senior staff's own design. But there's another danger in here. That speech was not only hailed by, Trump supporters, but But over the last day or so, we've been seeing a lot of right-wing extremists who, potentially terrorist groups, neo-Nazis, who have been calling that what they call the 1488 speech, right? The 14 words,
yes,
right?
Which are, if you have it off the top of your head.
We must protect the existence of our
white race,
of our white race, and the future of our white children,
right?
And then /88, which stands for the letters for HH, Heil Hitler. And that has been burning like wildfire, not only over Stormfront and all these other websites.
We see the tweet that Sarah Palin tweeted out yesterday, says 14 words.
You know, a few years ago, a guy by the name of Anders Behring Breivik in Norway, a right-wing extremist follower of the, this same doctrine, mass murdered over 75 people in Norway, believing that would bring about this uprising to secure those 14 words. Were we to see that? And is this being condoned by the White House?
And circumventing the United States doesn't just hurt the United States, it hurts all of our allies as well. Everyone else becomes weaker, from France to Germany, and then obviously Russia's the benefactor.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.